Yes, we have our select group here.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
You were all vetted before you were allowed to come in.
Our international visitors haven't showed up yet.
Okay, but it's just like being in church. Nobody wants the first 2 rows. I'm going to warn you right now, Wendy is going to be passing the hat around.
You're not.
All right. Anyway, I was kind of hesitant about doing a program like this because I realized we would not get a large crowd and so forth. So I put myself in a hot spot here because I don't get paid. Okay, so it's all net income to us today. The people, first of all, we'll introduce them. Pam Barton from Lena, Dan Edler, Roger Goodsby, and Mr. Harlan Corey, and Mr. Wayne Smith. And I think you know them all. They've all waived their $100 usual fee. Okay, so we're set there. What I made out a little brief thing here to kind of guide me in this session, and so kind of bear with me on it. You all have a copy of this, and I'll refer to this every once in a while. This is the cheap copy when we do the good binding. It costs $10. You got this one as part of your ticket. Okay? All right. One of the things that I went through, looking through this, is I asked myself, what type of mediums are various artists using, watercolor, etc. So I looked at the roughly 36 pieces that we have in there, and here's what I came up with. It's kind of interesting. Only one of our artists has something in here done in oil. That is, at least I could find. And that's Dwayne, okay? So he has one piece of oil. If you want to look on page 9 in your book, that's the one that he did in oil. Can you find it there? Page numbers are on the bottom.
We got one long, right?
Yeah, this one here. This. Okay. All right, so that's the one that was done, and the only one I can find here that was done in oil. Now, who has stuff which is strictly in watercolor? Harlan, Dwayne, Stella Perkins, and Ken Thistle, and Grace Mitchell. In other words, of all the pieces we have here, those 5 people chose to use watercolor. Pen and ink, only one, Ron Beatty. And I'll have some comments on that a little bit later. Pastel, we have 3 artists who use pastel. One was the Blackwoods, which you've got painting over there. One over there underneath the speaker. You can't quite see it from here. It's in the book though. Susan Hedstrand, who's a California artist, and she did along with the horse and the lady there. And then we have one done by Helen Hill. And it's up above the door. Okay? Way up and small enough above the door.
I just collapsed.
All right. We had one which is done in pencil. That was Ken Thistle. Okay? Now the big thing that a lot of people are using, they have been using, acrylic. Now some of the artists use several different mediums, but using acrylic, Harlan, Roger, Dwayne, Pam Barton, Dan Edler, Rosalie Rockman, Ken Thistle, and Roger Hill. All these people use acrylic. And by the way, all of the murals back there are acrylic. Okay. And I was looking for somebody who had used a mixture. I couldn't find one that was a mixture of mediums. I do have one, Roger, of yours. I believe is a mixture at home. And that's the one with the corn stalks, which I believe is a mixture of watercolor and pen and ink.
Watercolor and acrylic, probably.
Really?
Yeah.
It looks to me like almost like
Well, there may be some pen and ink in there too.
Well,
Mixture
outlining,
is a mixture.
yeah, outlining the corn
Yeah.
shops and so forth. But that's, we have none here that I know of. It's possible that some of the ones that are pen and ink might also have a little bit of pencil in there, but it's almost, at least the artist has never quoted that. Okay, what I'm trying to do here now is find out from the artists, 5 artists here, the particular reason that they have for working in a particular medium, and what they find are the difficulties with that medium, and what makes them want to work with it, both from the standpoint of being able to express themselves, and also the ease of working with it. Okay? So, who wants to start out? Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was trained more or less in oil. Back in those days, oil was the primary thing that artists, serious artists did. Well, watercolor was always too. But then acrylics came on the scene, and I found that after experimenting with them and so forth, that they're a lot more flexible than oil. And I had a problem with oil was sometimes I would send a painting to an art show or something, and it'd come back and somebody had punched the canvas and it had cracked. And acrylic, you don't have that problem so much. It's a tougher. And that's one of the main reasons I switched.
Is there any particular difficulty you find with the acrylic?
Well, the one thing I don't care for acrylic as well as the oil is if I want a little slow drying process, like if I was painting a portrait, I choose oil because it goes a little slow, dries a little slower. I can blend it longer. And then the acrylic tends to go, you have to work kind of differently.
Okay.
See, that's why I don't like oil, or oil is too slow. And I
mean the drying process?
I usually finish a painting in 2 days. And with oil, you put a layer on, and you gotta wait for it to dry, and it may take a week for it to dry, and then you can do another glaze, and you gotta wait and wait, and I just couldn't stand that waiting. Acrylic, you're dry within at least 5 minutes, and you can put a glaze on or change the color or anything you want. I tried oil, and it was just too slow. It was agonizing for me to use it.
Okay, but do you find with the oil, though, because of the nature of oil, that you get more depth to a painting?
I don't think so. I think perhaps you might get a little better color with oil than acrylic, but it's a very marginal thing. And I do about half my paintings in watercolor, the other half in acrylic. And acrylic is durable. We don't yet know what it's going to be like 300 years from now, how the paintings last, but it's very tough, very durable. I keep telling you to take the damn plastic off those things. For acrylic, you don't need that. If you have an acrylic painting and it gets dirty, you can wash it off with soap and water. And that's the big advantage to acrylic. And it's even tougher than oil when it's dry. So,
you recommend plastic off? Well, basically, the reason for the plastic coming off is because people sat back there and had oil in their hair.
well, it also was
Scratched.
hairpins and stuff.
Yeah.
Polished through
Yeah.
the paint.
But we have mostly adults, so they won't do that. Okay. Harlan?
I echo the same things. Speed is the reason I went to watercolor and acrylic. Another thing is, getting a little bit away from the medium, is one of my problems is drawing or painting what I see, but it's up here. I cannot go out and what it's landscape mainly is my subject matter. I can't go out and sit in a landscape and draw what I see. I can go out and live in the landscape, then go back and remember what I see. And that allows a little imagination to go in.
Okay, but most of your stuff is in watercolor.
Yeah, mostly.
Ken?
Well, I have a different point of view. I sort of brag about, I get all my art materials from Menards. And for one thing, it's real cheap. And I always use that Ulan plywood, which is 1/4 inch thick, and it's the cheapest plywood you can get. And I buy my paint, you know, Rust-Oleum by the gallon. And that's inexpensive too. And what that does is provides you with freedom. You can use a ton of paint, but if you buy little tubes of oil paint and acrylics and stuff, they cost you a fortune. And it inhibits your freedom as an artist. And I like to do big paintings. And so it, to me, and like I say, it dries quick and so forth because I'm impatient. And I like that. And I found that even my paintbrushes, everything I buy at Menards. My son-in-law is a manager of a Menards. I said, maybe you ought to get Menards to run me in an ad.
How about you, Karen?
I am so privileged to be sitting with all these gentlemen, and I wholeheartedly agree with everything they're saying. And I have my own experience. When I was in high school, I was forbidden to paint in oils. And I was hurt and angry, but that was the rule. And once you make a commitment and the investment in the materials, it's tough to switch. It'd be great to have a studio this size, and you could have a corner for oils and a corner for acrylics and whatever medium you wanted to use. The thing that I use in my acrylics is I have used matte medium, and so you can layer and layer and layer and bleed through and bleed onto, so that you get a richness that the oil would give naturally. I don't know if it's because of the acrylics, probably not, but I am fast. I paint so fast. And it's just, I say that if I were put in a padded cell that was all white, with nothing to draw with, I would go crazy.
Another thing about acrylic paint is I always use high gloss acrylic, and I like the gloss of that, but also it's good to have matte surface as well, or maybe halfway in between. And one of the things that makes that possible with high gloss acrylic paint is I use something from my glass business, which is ground silica. And if you mix that in with the high gloss acrylic paint, it makes it matte. And so then you can put any amount you want in there to make it a little matte or a lot matte. And also you can add other things to it to give it like body, where it's not real fluid. You can give it body by adding other things to the paint, and it's very versatile.
I think it's interesting that most of us like acrylic. And there's a little bit of prejudice in the art market, and that if you have two paintings and one is acrylic and one is oil, the oil will cost twice as much as the acrylic.
And
It's sort of
the viewer cannot tell.
But if they save oil, it's worth more. Now, I don't know why, but it's just more fashionable to have an oil painting than an acrylic
Traditionally.
painting. And it is, I think it's just tradition. But we have these modern materials now, and it looks like you can buy a lot of stuff at Menards. And anything that you buy from an art store, the price will be twice as much as you can at Menards. You can buy Rust-Oleum clear acrylic spray at Menards for half what you're going to pay for a Krylon or something you buy from an art store. And it's the same thing. They see it coming. They really do.
Well, it's a modern thing. Oils is, I guess, what you say is a more conservative thinking about art. Really, because the old masters used oil. So
That's right.
it's kind of a conservative point of view, maybe.
Oh, it's interesting, Dan, that you commented you like to work with big pieces. Big art. Okay, what do you mean by big art? How big?
Oh, well, not as big as I've seen. I know this one woman that paints paintings like 40 feet by 40 feet, and she uses one of those hydraulic lifts to work on the painting. And, I'm not talking about that big.
Okay.
Like 6 foot square, or 5 feet square, stuff like that.
Harlan?
I'd like to put in a word for women artists. My best teacher was a woman,
Was you really?
my mother.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my mother went to the Art Institute of Chicago. And so I grew up around oil. It was oils.
Right.
But she specialized in still life.
He mentioned the Art Institute of Chicago. He knows that one of my very, very good friends, Dick Loving, is Professor Emeritus of the Art Institute of Chicago, School of Art there. And you were talking, Dan, about large paintings. A number of years ago, Dick lived on an apartment building on the north side of Chicago, I think it was Ashland Avenue. And he had a basement that had a 11-foot high ceiling. And he put his thing way, put his canvas way down at the end, and the building was roughly about 70 feet front to back. He'd get all the way up the front, he'd stand there with his brush and so forth and so forth. Then he'd run up there for a couple of dabs, he'd run back, he'd look at it. He only weighed about 135 pounds by the time he got done. But hey, it paid off. He got a MacArthur grant for $25,000 for that. But his painting was literally 11 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. I never saw it finished though, so I don't know. Okay. I was going to make a comment on one thing on Ron Beam. You'll notice that Ron Beam only worked in pen and ink. Why do you think that was?
He was
In my color.
an architect, engineer.
No, name.
Ron was trained as a designer.
He was a draftsman. He was a draftsman. And you swear, I always had this feeling that when he was working on something, he was with a ruler and going like this and like this. There's one, where's this one in here? Let's see if we can find that thing. Let me see. Take a look at on page one. Okay, yeah, page 2, page 4. Page 4 that shows the his pen and ink sketch of the Henny carriage work. You see that?
Right there.
Okay. Hey, look, he's got every side, every board in there. And if you look very closely at the roof, I can swear that he's got every shingle that he's done by hand. And it's a sign of, I can just see him. It reminds me of first year in high school when I had to take a 6-week jazz drafting course. You had the you had the electric, you had the woodworking, metal, draftsman. That's what it reminds me. And everything that Ron did, it gets that same feeling. He had to use pen and ink to do that. All right. Pardon me.
Let somebody else do it.
turn quickly to the murals that the four men here have done. Start with Roger. When I first asked them to do these murals, all I said was I want each one of you to come up with some story in Cedarville history, but you've got to get together so you don't all come up with the same story, okay? And they graciously, I donated not plywood, we used masonite. We had 4 by 8 feet of masonite, we cut it down. They provided the material. Now I know that you want to cheaply at Menards, okay. And they came up with a tell. How did you come up with your concept? I mean, when you thought to tell something about history, idea.
Well, you gave us a choice of what we could do, and the option that was offered to me was prehistory.
Okay.
And the prehistory of Cedarville. And I lived on Pine Hill on a limestone cliff that is full of fossils. I would sit on my patio 80 feet above Cedar Creek and look at those limestone cliffs and think, what was this like 400 million years ago? And how did these limestone cliffs form? And I've always been interested in prehistory of any area. And I'm thinking, you know, 400 million years ago, I wasn't sitting 80 feet above Cedar Creek on a rock. I was on the bottom of an ocean, and little things were coming down to make the limestone. That idea of Cedar Cliff and Cedar Creek geologically was important to me, and then I thought, well, I'll go with the prehistory, and I started out, and if you'll notice, there's a lot of cliffs in that painting, and it carries through from the beginning where all the seashells and diatoms.
We need to take the plastic off of this better.
Pardon?
Take the plastic off and we see it better.
Yes, please take the plastic off. Anyway, then life developed and spread on, and we had the glaciers that probably took, after the Cedar Cliffs had risen up from tectonic forces, the glaciers had probably wiped a little bit off. But then I thought about, okay, those cliffs were there when man first came to this continent. They were there when the Indians were settling. I'm sure Indians had a campground down below here on the flat. I'm sure the Indians knew about the grotto and the cave, which a lot of people in Cedarville don't know about. Underneath Cedar Cliff, there's an area where there's about a 10-foot overhang. And under that overhang, there are all kinds of ferns and mosses. It's an enchanted, eerie, mystical place. I'm sure the Indians considered that as a holy place. And then, of course, there's the cave at the end of that area where Jim Adams played and where my kids played. A wonderful place for kids to grow up in Cedarville. And I just want to carry that along through the time when the first permanent settlers came. And so that's what in my painting. But mainly I was thinking about the cliffs and the creek and how important it is to the kids to play. My 30-year-old grandson was here last weekend with 4 friends from Chicago. 30-year-old people, after a few beers, what they want to do, go down to the cave. And this is what we used to do whenever we had visitors. I remember we had one time when I had a troop of Cub Scouts, and they were camping on Pine Hill, and we were going to take them down to see the cave, and I gave them this story about how mysterious and eerie that place is, and it really is. And I said, now there's a witch that lives down there, and if you're not good, you get in trouble, so you have to be quiet And just to make sure you're safe, you have to hold on to your ear like this. And of course the Cub Scouts, yeah, you're full of beans and all this stuff. They're trying to be big heroes. We went down there and I looked behind me and here's all these Cub Scouts marching on. Cedarville's a great place. Cedar Creek was a great place for kids to play. That's why I did the painting of the kids skinny dipping. And I won't tell you which one of those is Leroy Wilson. But that's the whole idea.
You know, that's interesting because when I see your thing, I see it in a chronological way and also in a geometric way. From the standpoint, I see an angle going from the upper left down to the lower right. The big burst up at the top, that's the Big Bang. Go all the way down and you end up with the first cabin in the lower right going in. I do not see the cliffs. I see that particular motif to it. So I see the chronological Big Bang to...
Well, it's chronological, but it goes around like the clock.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Let's see. How about the... Dwayne?
Go ahead.
Yours, Dwayne?
Well, if you look on page 28, you see that a little picture of Cedarville, and that came out of the old plat book. It was little lithographs that some artists made back in '71, and that was used by everyone since then as a sort of as a basis of what Cedarville looked like back then. And Stella Perkins' painting is based on that, one of her paintings anyway. And so that at the upper part, that tends to be that view. And then as you go down, you see Jane Addams and her family. And of course, the theme was the Addams family, and Jane Addams and her family. And her family then was her background. Her father, of course, was very important in her thinking. And then down to Hull House, and then her work with the immigrants. And she did so many things that I had to put on the bottom there on the right-hand side a list of all the things that she did. There's like a dozen things, big things that she was involved in. But actually this, I worked so long on the drawing in preparation of doing this that I decided to leave it like the drawing. I decided to kind of let it be. I liked it as the drawing.
It's interesting, one of the things, I was just counting the major figures that you have on there, not the two down the bottom lower left. There are actually 7 figures there, the 2 parents, and you actually do have the five surviving children. That's the first time I ever bothered to count to make sure they're all there, and I'm just trying to figure out which one is the son.
Well,
Esselman.
Actually, the children at the bottom are just meant to be the immigrant children.
Immigrant children, okay.
Basically.
Okay, all right, then it works out so that the 4 major children that you have there, those are the 4 children of the family that actually survived to adulthood, because the one daughter died at the age of 17. So you do have the four children there. I like to be able to count numbers that should be there. Harlan?
The main thing I want to mention is an apology. I had the commercial interest in the businesses in Cedarville. I left out Dan Adler.
Oh.
And pointed at, I went through all the things and worked in the drawings. And so, none of them are original.
I think Dan wasn't there in the 19th century anyway.
Right.
Well, yeah, right.
We can use that excuse, okay? All right. Dan, what about yours?
Well, that's a good question. I sort of have a background in architecture, and so I sort of was attracted to the buildings and mainly the houses. I did include one church just because it was an old one. And in Cedarville are basically, you know, like federal houses, Georgian houses, and Italianate Victorian designs. But actually, there's not really that good of an example of any of those. I sort of think of them as like Pennsylvania Dutch or something like that, or Dutch colonial. There's sort of a mixture of more than one style. And I have my little pen here. It's right there. That's the Bentham House. That's a Italianate house. And Dr. Thompson's house, where Dwayne used to live, has that Italianate detail. It's mainly the roof line and so forth, like the windows and the moldings and stuff like that. And then of course I used our house too right there. That's what you would call a federal style, but it's not that great a federal style either. And most of these brick houses in Cedarville, they were, especially the early ones, like mine was built in 1848. It was one of the early brick houses. And when the people came out from out east, they sort of knew houses like that. And they probably didn't have that much money, so they wanted to build a house that reminded them of a back home. And so they built those kind of houses, sort of, you know, not that fancy or anything. Later on, in the later part of the 19th century, they built nicer houses, like in the 1888 is when Paul Fry's house was built. And I think Dr. Thompson's house was, or where Dwayne lived, was 1880s too.
You say Dr. Thompson's house, that's a frame house.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons I didn't use it, because I used all brick houses. But, you know, actually, in any composition, you have to limit what you put in. You can't put everything in, like a term paper or a theme. You can't put every idea you ever had in the same thing. You gotta limit it. So I decided to use sort of the older, simpler brick houses. But then I did include the old Methodist church there, and this is Galen's parents' house there. And the only thing I know about it is a picture that Jim gave me. And that one used to be, according to what I heard, Queen Anne house, a two-story that somebody demolished back in the 50s or whatever it was, and built a fancy, you know, 3 or 4 bedroom ranch up there. And at the other end of Cherry Street, where Merle Kaiser used to live, that used to be a big 2-story Queen Anne too. Too bad they didn't keep them, but he tore it down and made it look like the 1950s. So anyway, that was sort of my plan. And then as I worked along in the composition, I started by just making this S line right down through the middle. That's how I started the composition. And then one thing led to another, and I sort of worked like build on an idea. And one thing led to the next, and I sort of thought, oh, it kind of looks like the yellow brick road. So I painted it yellow. The yellow brick road through Cedarville. And then I thought, well, gee, I got all these buildings there and no wife. So I decided to put this couple down here, a father and his daughter. And I think of that porch is next to you where you live, Jim. I sort of thought of that porch. And of course, those turned columns are an excellent example of 19th century wood construction. So I used that motif, and then I called it, Joni, shall we go for a stroll? That's what I named the painting. It came to me after I painted the painting, and I thought, gee, maybe there was a Joni that used to live in Cedarville back in the 19th century. And I thought, oh, that's a pretty neat idea, actually. And so I put the silhouettes of the father and daughter there, thinking of taking a walk up the yellow brick road. And then I also included a couple of these Victorian columns, like there and over here, just because I felt the composition needed a little structure to hold it up. So I put those columns in, and it goes down there too. And this is the porch of Paul Fry's old house. And this one is where Jean Joyce used to live. And let's see, this one, I don't know who lives there now, but I think the Coles used to live there, the Coxes, and I don't know who all. And this one, a lot of different people. Mark Jacobs grew up there. He lives in the church now. And there were quite a few families. Taylor Rockwell used to live there, and a lot of people. But then, who is it? Let's see, Judy, tell me, who converted the church into a house? Ginger Bright.
Ginger Bright, yeah.
Converted the church into a house, and so Mark Jacobs lives there now. But he's like that lifelong resident of Cedarville, I think. But that's sort of the way I went about it, and sort of concentrated mainly on the older brick houses that weren't quite so fancy. But it was what they did, I think, just to remind them of home when they first came to Cedarville before 1850. But I've been out east, you know, and you can, I walk down the street in Williamsburg or even lots of towns out there, and I see a lot of houses that look just like mine that were built in the 1700s. So most of these ideas that they built around here back in the mid-19th century were probably ideas from the 1700s out east, because that was in their neighborhood where they came from, and made them feel more comfortable, I guess. And I think the bricks, of course, what I hear, were made at a brickyard west of town, the Canfield brickyard. And I don't know if my house was made out of those, but I think it probably was at that period of time. One of the nicest Georgian houses in Cedarville is actually where Frederick Perkins used to live, and Tom Markley lives there now. It's just down the street from my house there on Stevenson. It has detailed brickwork on it, and one of the differences between Federal and Georgian, like this house here has the little paneled windows, I think, or maybe Galen's old house does. That's one of the main characteristics of the Georgian house. And the Federal houses usually had a vertical divide in the windows right up the middle. And there were other factors too, but that's one of the first clues that you can tell between Georgian and Federal design. Like if you go to Williamsburg in Virginia, you can see a good example of that type of construction from that period of time. And even down at Nauvoo, Illinois, where the Mormons were, they built that city in the 1840s. And the whole town looked practically like our house, which was kind of neat, actually. And they built them all in that style.
You go down there and you may walk in the wrong door.
Yeah, they look like
you said, when did you say your house was built?
1848.
1848.
That's when we have a deed for the house, and that's the year when the value of the property went way up.
Okay.
So I assume that's when they built a house on it.
Okay. That might be a little questionable. The brickyard, which was Canfield, by the way, Canfield is not, as it's in most history books, it's not C-A-N-F-I-E-L-D, it's C-A-N-F-I-L. Okay. The brickyard was in Red Oak, right. Pardon me. On the north side of Red Oak, if you go down the Jane Addams Trail and you get to the very far end of Red Oak, and you look to the left, you've got about the length of 3 football fields before the creek is running. That is where the brickyard was. Now, the creek has changed. If you look at the various plat maps and so forth, the creek has changed its course several times. But that's the general area. I have been out there with the farmer who owns that land, is planting soybeans right now. And he said when they turned over with the plow, they got out a bunch of broken bricks. And these were probably discards.
Well, when did that brickyard
Our
start?
brickyard, the best bet we have on that Canfield was a brick, an acre, came from Ohio, and he bought about 40, 50, 60 acres in that area north of town in 1850. And then he ended up with about 240 acres. The brickyard was in operation from, according to stories, 1850 to shortly after he died. He died 1880.
Well, the thing about it is that in Freeport, maybe if that brickyard wasn't there, in Freeport, there was a brickyard on Galena, right where Whistler comes into Galena. And the clay around here you can only make those soft brick out of the kind of clay we have around here, because if you fire it any higher, it melts. So all you can do is go up to the temperature that those are fired at, so that it doesn't melt, because it's got too much.
Supposedly the first brick house built in Cedarville was 1851, and that was the one where Richard's store used to be located. Richard's store was a two-story brick built for a guy as a residence for a man by the name of James Sutherland. Shortly after it was built, he sold it. Richard's store eventually came in, and they lived on the second floor, and the store was on the bottom part. And it's interesting you mentioned the soft brick. This is the second brick. This is the second school on this site. It's actually on the limestone foundation of the first building, which was put up in 1855. And the story is that the reason they tore that one down, one of the reasons given, is that it was made of soft brick at the beginning to heal. Well, we really don't know. Did they tear the entire thing down, or only the third layer of brick? Because all the rooms are the same dimensions as the rooms in that first building. Now, the big difference, though, is that we tend, on this particular building, to have a roof line that is late Victorian, whereas the roof line on the 1855 building was more of federal, more of federal. So we really don't know. All we know is that the foundation is the same one as the 1855 building that we had at that time. Okay, only getting from them, I've already explained with Ron Beam why he used the pen and ink. We're going over the murals. And question for you, and I'll start with Pam now because she didn't have a chance here. What is it, forgetting about assignments that I'm giving someone to do a particular thing, what basically will inspire you or moves you to do a certain piece of art? Painting, carving, whatever.
I think probably any artist. I try to describe it to people, and it's like you have a video camera playing in your head. And anybody can be talking about anything, and we will see it. Probably will see it before we can get the words out or even comprehend what it is. We get pictures. The hardest thing in the world is to get that video camera to stop. And so I think that's why artists throughout history have made sketches and studies before they did their paintings. It is so hard to take what's perfect in your imagination and get it on canvas.
Okay, very good. Dwayne?
Well, of course I do, in later years I did primarily the landscape. And then I basically do the landscape that's, a lot of it's just right around here.
Mm-hmm.
And like the gray painting there.
This one?
I drove past that place you know, 50, 100 times probably going to work.
That's the winery,
Yeah.
this one here. That's
But
great.
this time of year, and this foggy winter morning when you're going into work, finally it came across to me that I really liked it. That's really neat. And then I tried to use that as my subject. And so I was inspired by the landscape. And when you do landscape, you can take liberties, and it can be more or less abstract, and nobody seems to mind.
Okay. You also like that scene because we did another one from a different angle, the same thing.
Actually, I did a whole series of that winter frosty morning, I call them.
Okay.
A whole series of those, and they must have struck a chord with a lot of people because they must have seen the same thing.
The building, the house that is there is, I can tell you from the outside, on the inside, it is virtually unchanged from when it was originally built. The guy who, I think his last name was Bell. In fact, he owned a big chunk of land there. The reason I remember it was Bell, because he had a daughter whose name was Anna Bell, okay, who happened to marry my wife's great uncle. So that's how it keeps coming back. But I've been in, that's Pam Roslin and her husband own the house right now. She has maintained that thing perfectly. How about you, Harlan?
Well, first of all, I want to say that one of the most important things in this room is the window blinds. Because a lot of people don't realize what sunlight does to paintings, particularly watercolor. So, thank goodness that we keep this out of the sun as much as possible.
These are as opaque as we could buy.
Yeah. As far as the mural is concerned, I've never done a mural before. I didn't know quite what to do. So I began to get these ideas and stack them up as a design. So I did it more as a design than as a narrative. Because most of these are copies of things that we already have. And that's why I think it's a wonderful thing that Jim has arranged this room and got initiated the whole idea of this room. How many other places like this have dedicated to art, a whole room?
I just hope we don't have to put them up near the ceiling.
Yeah.
Okay, how about you, Roger?
Well, you were asking what inspired you.
Yeah, what turns you on?
I gotta tell you that I'm teaching my watercolor class again right now. And what I always tell my students is, I don't care whether you learn how to paint a watercolor picture. I want you to learn how to see. And they all look at me like, what a little weird guy. And I said, I want you to learn how to see like a 3-year-old child that picks up a dandelion and studies it and says, this is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful thing. And his dad comes out and says, oh, I gotta get some more weed killer. The same kid looks at a mud puddle with an oil stain on it, look at all the beautiful colors. His dad says, I gotta take the car in. I'm trying to get you to, as a student, to see, to appreciate the beauty that's all around you. And sometimes you find the most beautiful things in unexpected places. But I want my students and myself to be able to drive down a road like you're going to Stockton and they have all those beautiful bur oak trees. And you're driving along and think, wouldn't that make a wonderful painting? Or you see a landscape and you think, oh, that would make a great painting if I just moved that barn over a little bit or took out the telephone pole or added this tree. We forget how to see as we get older. And I hope that a little bit that some of my students begin to appreciate the ability to see. But my inspiration is seeing, and it's hard to see. It really is.
I just wrote a poem about this.
You did.
And as my eyesight is going, I'm turning to poetry. My poem has about, I looked out on the deck and there was a puddle of water. I forget, I wish I could have brought it with me, I'd read it to you, it's very short. But the image that I saw in the puddle of water was trees and stuff, but they were upside down. So it's
I'd like to comment on what Roger was saying too. As artists, we're given a special insight to be able to see and then translate that on paper. But the privilege of being an artist and responsibility, and Harlan, I think you probably do this best of all, is that we interpret also. We give, a photograph can capture an emotion, but a painting, we are able to put emotion into what we see. We paint feelings. And we can do it whether it's modern, whether it's interpretive, whether it's I call myself a romantic realist, but all of us put something into it.
Well, we have to compete with the camera. And the camera has to record what's there. We have the privilege of changing it.
And do you hear that?
Look at Harlan's picture up there at the cemetery, which I think is absolutely gorgeous.
Yes.
Okay, if you took a photograph of Cedarville Cemetery, so there's...
But the key word is, Roger, is privilege.
Well, and in fact, what you do, you look at a picture and you see what is there, but what the artist can do is the artist can interpret the picture, give meaning to it, interpret. What the hazard there, though, is that two artists will interpret that picture differently.
Oh, but that's what makes each one of us different. And no, not a problem.
And this was the subject of my poem also, was the interpretation. I saw what I saw was upside down. Trees growing down into the sky. So that the thought was, well, somewhere else, people are seeing that as a mistake. But then it's true. I used to tell kids, if you were a Chinaman, that direction would be up.
Harlan, one of the most common things you hear people say is, you know, I never noticed that. And they always say, in art, they're always talking about learning how to see, like Roger was saying. But in music, it's like you have to learn how to hear. And they say, what do you mean? I know how to hear. What do you think I am, deaf? But you don't know how to hear. It's just like you don't know how to see. And that's what you have. It's having training in art, that's basically what you're trained to do, is to see. And also artists tend to be visually oriented anyway. You know, their eyeballs are really important. They learn through their eyeballs. And like you can see something and you know how to do it. If you read a book, it could take you all day trying to figure it out in a book. But in 5 minutes you could see it and know how to do it.
Which one of you guys read the instructions? Putting something together.
After I can't put it together, then
Artists don't read instructions.
But what we're talking about here is learning how to live. Not only how to see, but how to hear, how to taste, how to appreciate life. And art is part of how to appreciate life.
I would like to ask you, I mean, we know where we're coming from. I've seen your face. I get, when we say something, we're going, yep, yep. What about you? What do you want to know what it's like to put something down? Have you, Judy, you know more than many because you're creative too. But
I made a lot of paintings too, but I just, it's a private experience.
actually, yes. I often thought that selling my work, something that was real special to me, was like trying to put a price on your guts.
Yeah.
And then hang it out on a clothesline and people go, eh.
One of the things that I've always been asked, and I've made thousands of pieces of work that are out all over the world, and people ask me, don't you hate to part with that? And everything I make is for sale. It's my business. I can't wait to sell it. I'm just interested in making it, not keeping it. And it just is, I'm not a collector, I'm a maker. And thank God for collectors. Because they got me in business.
They start museums.
I have a question. If art is interpretation and feeling, when you're working on a piece, how do you know when it's done?
That's the hardest thing in the world, when to stop.
That's one of the things that people talk about a lot when you're studying art, is knowing when enough is enough. And knowing when to quit.
It's better to be a little bit under finished than over finished. And that can be a technique too, where you could enhance something that you want people to focus on. And for instance, you put something in the center and you fade to the top and bottom and sides, and that tells the person, this is where I want you to look. You wouldn't know it, but we do it deliberately. But if you overwork something, it loses the interpretive value.
One of the things in mediums, like the difference between oil paint and watercolor, is oil paint, you can work at it a long time, for days, for weeks, for months, and if you don't like something, you just paint over it and redo it. But if you're a watercolor artist, you make a mistake, it's ruined. I mean, it's transparent. You can't paint it over and redo it. You have to plan it ahead so you do it right the first time. You can't paint over and redo it.
I'm hesitant to throw anything away. I've come to a whole pile of old throwaway paintings, and some of them I've said, well, gee, that's a pretty good beginning.
Right. How many of you are left-handed? Is anybody left-handed here?
Music?
No, left-handed.
Oh, left-handed now.
Most famous artists are left-handed. And that's an automatic translation for the right brain. Have you noticed when you're working, I don't notice when it happens, but I notice when I quit. I probably should not drive because the hemispheres of my brain will switch and I'll kind of feel a letdown.
Well, there's another aspect to that too, in the arts, especially in show business, or even in visual arts. Most of the famous people are mentally ill.
Oh,
and that's why they're different. And that's what catches people's attention. Their uniqueness. They can do something that, gosh, nobody ever thought of that
I
before.
tried so hard
Or
to be
nobody ever acted like that before. Or like James Dean. I mean, he was so terrific, but God, that guy was, he was mentally ill. And that was the reason why they attract people's attention because they're different from everybody else. And they think, wow, look at that lady or guy or whatever. Boy, they're unique. Or they're really different. And a lot of the reputation of artists, you know, like Van Gogh, you know, cut his ear off, and, you know, various people, Jackson Pollock, you know, drank himself to death, and, you know, there's different French artists, I forget his name now, he drank himself to death too. I mean, what that is mental illness. And that also, as long as it doesn't destroy your life, it makes you different, and you think different. And when you do something, people say, geez, never saw anything like that before. And then it attracts attention. And in acting, it's the same thing. Maybe in music, it's the same thing too.
And writing, I suppose, good writers.
But mental illness isn't always bad, it can be good.
It's different.
Yeah, I've noticed.
I know the answer. I admire your family sing. That's your family sing. Yeah.
That's my, to be honest, that's my least favorite that I've done in connection with the Cedarville Museum. And one of the reasons is, the idea is here, and it's perfect. I see it going on. I see the whole interaction. But because it was done quickly and for a reasonable amount of income, I didn't do a study on perspective in each person, and so it's
What I notice is, well, I'm a musician, so I know how to put emotion into my music. But how do you? I can feel the personalities.
Oh,
I can hear the piano. I can almost hear the piano.
I'm so glad. Actually,
And how do you put that on?
all of it was a story that Steve Meyer's wife told me.
Oh.
She said, that's Bonnie Babe in the lower left corner. And apparently it was her grandfather that played the piano, and it was a big deal. And apparently he just loved it. And the two boys everybody would kind of join in. Bonnie loved it. And Mom, Grandma, was always working in the kitchen. And she never came out and participated. But all of this is from a story that Sue said.
I can feel those different things, but it mystifies me how you convey it.
That's what we all want.
It's interesting you brought up this particular point. One other thing was with comment. There's a difference in doing a piece of art based on an existing picture and doing a piece of art from a verbal description. Now, when you see a good difference, this picture right here, this one you see there, that is a black and white, that comes from a black and white picture taken by Willard Fink in 1911. That's the house that they just tore down behind you, Clint Fink's house. We know who those three guys are, and Roger did the work here, and he had a black and white picture to work from, something he could look at. In the case over there, with my wife's grandfather, Bonnie described what this guy would be doing. She had no way of looking at it. The grandfather, you don't know the 99 bottles of beer on the wall, okay, well this was like one of those Shaggy Dog stories about a cat. It kept going on and on and on, okay? And John Dixon was the Methodist minister here in 1919. And it's Bonnie sitting on the floor. That's John Dixon's wife in the background, and that's Bonnie's two cousins, Ronald and I can't remember his name. But this scene was described to her, and that's her interpretation of something she heard, not something she actually witnessed.
One thing though too about the art in this room is all what you would call pictorial art. Now, this is only one small fraction of art. I mean, there is the totally abstract where it's like a visual poem, just an expression. And art doesn't always have to be beautiful. In fact, art can be ugly as sin. That's the message. I mean, you hear a lot about it in, you know, Washington, D.C. or New York or whatever, the latest exhibition that people are all repulsed by. But this is only one small fraction of art, and a lot of people think if they can't recognize the picture, it's not good art. And that's ridiculous. That's only one small, and pictorial art goes back to the era before photography. If you wanted to have a portrait of your grandma, you had to hire somebody to paint it. Okay, they didn't have photography.
You made a good point. Let me point out one particular painting here. That one up there. Well, all looks like a bunch of squares, crosshairs, and so forth. The second one to the right. You got that's a Rosalie Rockland painting. They're both Rosalie Rockland paintings. That's a Rosalie Rockland painting up there, and this is one over here by her. Okay. Now, anybody want to guess what the name of that painting is?
Which one?
The second one over, one of the yellowish one.
It's some little Spain, doesn't it?
I'll give you $10 anyone. I'll give you $20 anyone who can tell me what the name of that painting is. No. All right. You had to look it up.
Yes.
That is the town of the city of Toledo, Spain. Okay. Now I will tell you right now that I recognized it when I saw the name on it. I recognized what she was trying to do because I have seen that same view of the city. Okay, step back if you want. Step back a couple hundred yards, and you're on a cliff, and there's a chasm in front of you, and on the other side of the chasm is the city of Toledo. Okay, and if you look down, you see the tall buildings in the background, and the rest of that is simply the low-lying residential area. Now, Bonnie and I were in Toledo about I guess 10, 12 years ago, something like that. And I will tell you, we were sitting in a little cocktail lounge on that cliff drinking sangrias until they ran out. And we happened to witness that what had happened on that particular night is that the soccer team from Toledo had played the soccer team from Barcelona, and they weren't supposed to, but Toledo had won. And they were having a great big celebration at that town. We could hear 1,000 feet across the chasm, we could hear all the celebration going on there. Now, the interesting thing is, anyone familiar with the painting that El Greco did of Toledo?
Sure.
He took it from the same view.
Yeah.
El Greco, if you've seen the El Greco painting of Toledo, is he took it from the same view, but it is not like this. It was his view of it. Okay? Now, I know that she was in Toledo because that particular picture is done in the southern part of Spain, of Andalusia. That's exactly what the scene looks like. Small towns, barren ground all around it. Okay? But tremendous imagination to see that, okay? And once it was kind of, I don't know if I had never been there, if I would have gotten that interpretation right away. Someone would really have had to explain it to me. But I was familiar with the El Greco painting. And by the way, I still haven't figured out what the one to the left. I'm still trying to figure out just what she is. I'm trying to figure out, first of all, whether the woman's face in there is Rosalie.
No,
I don't think.
No, I don't think that's what she looked like, but it's meant to represent the person, Rosalie. Because the actual title, which I don't have, they're asking you to interpret that person. That person. I don't know. No, by the way, my wife knew Rosalie. She went to school with her at the University of Wisconsin for 3 years. And she said, Rosalie was a wonderful person, but she was a little strange at times.
I worked with her for several years.
Yes, yes. Now, I never met her, but I heard lots of stories. Bonnie told me that Rosalie taught my wife how to smoke.
Well, then Rosalie must have quit.
I don't know. It took my wife 40 years before she started.
I'd like to quote a person, an ex-clergyman I know.
What?
An ex-clergyman, he said, everything in the Bible is true. And some of it actually happened.
Well, what we're talking about here is realist, impressionist,
Yeah.
and abstract.
Okay.
We have a lot of realist paintings here because they're relative to Cedarville. We have a few impressionists, but we don't have any abstracts.
No.
And an abstract painting, which I've been trying to get into, and I find it is difficult, very difficult, comes straight from here. There's nothing that comes from the outside. I've always thought abstract painting was, oh, you just throw paint on canvas. It's not that easy. It's very difficult.
Well, that is the one that you all does everything.
Okay, anyway, that closes off tonight. We have free food on the other side.
Yes,
Eat all you can. Our next program comes up 2 weeks from tonight. That's when we have the basketball sisters.